Hi everyone. This video is a very crucial video in understanding what the scores in the GMAT Focus Edition and what the scores in the GMAT existing version, the old edition, mean. Do they mean the same? Are they alike scores, or are there is a significant difference between what you see in these two numbers? From what information has been made available by GMAT a few days back, it is like chalk and cheese. There is significant difference between the numbers between these two. Let's take a look at it. Let's start with things that we have covered in an earlier video. The earlier video we said, hey, there is going to be a period of time between October 2023 and October 2028 when the scores of both these versions are going to be live scores. A GMAT score is live for 5 years. So whoever takes the score in October 2023, this person's score is going to be valid till October 2028, and in October 2023 you can take the old version of the GMAT as much as you can take the focus edition of the GMAT. So for a 5-year window we're going to have overlap of these scores. So business schools and even test takers will want to know, hey, if I got something in the old test format, how much does it compare to when it comes to new test format? There has been a significant difference. There's been one major change they made to the overall scoring range. In the old version, it's from 200 to 800. In the new version, they added essentially 5 points is what we all thought, making it from 205 to 805. So it would have been a 700, 710, 720 in the old version. It's essentially 705, 715, 725 in the new version, right? This is how the scoring range basically moved. So when that information was alone available, all of us probably thought that, okay, a 720 in the old format, the equivalent is 725 in the Focus Edition. 740 in the old format, the equivalent in the Focus Edition is a 745. If we thought that, GMAT basically said, you couldn't be further away from the truth. It's very different. And it is statistically backed. It's not that GMAT just wants to throw a spanner in the wheel and say, hey, because you all thought this way, we want to bring about something new and prove that you guys haven't really thought through it. Statistically, the new scoring range basically gives you something completely different from what would have been the scoring range in the old one. Let's take a look at it, understand how this basically works, and we'll also basically see why this could have happened. Why is the new scoring range significantly different from the old one, the numbers, right? So if you thought, for example, in fact, we were saying we should in fact start changing our tagline, saying that make a 700 plus in the GMAT a reality, we should change it to a 705 plus in a reality in the GMAT. Is that something that we could directly port it by adding 5 more points? Let's check out. Have a look at this, right? Basically, what GMAT did is they picked up a sample size of 860 odd thousand students who had taken the actual GMAT for this 5-year window, July 2017 to June 2022, and ported their scores to the new format. Essentially, the new format has 3 sections: quant, verbal, and data insights. Quant does not have data sufficiency, that goes into data insights. Data insights comprises data sufficiency and IR. And the verbal section basically does not have sentence correction. So basically, GMAT has granular data about every single question that the test takers have taken. They basically said, if these test takers were administered the new format of the test for the questions remaining unchanged, what would have been their scores is what they did and calculated. This was not done with 100,000 or something. They've done it over a 5-year sample of real test takers for real scores that people have got. And it's a huge number, 860 odd thousand, right? Now look at it. What happens to the actual scores for the overall score range, right? Here is what we have. This is the GMAT Focus Edition. You have to compare it using the percentile version, right? Don't look at just the number. Don't say 720 in the old, the new one at 725. Let's see how grossly incorrect we would be. Let's look at the percentile versions of it, right? Now, we'll keep this Focus Edition out. All of these are 800, 800, 800, the old version, 100 percentile. Nothing wrong, right? 800, less than 1% of the GMAT test takers score that, therefore 100 percentile is what it would basically translate to. Let's now port that score into the GMAT Focus Edition. 100 percentile, till which point are you getting? It's not only for 805, it's not only for 795, all the way from 735 upward. If your score is 735, 745, 745, anything upward up to 805, you are in the top 100 percentile. Essentially, in the last 5 years, the people for whom they have ported the data, if they were asked to take the GMAT Focus Edition, if the GMAT Focus Edition is where their correct answers have been ported and scored, you will find that less than 1% of the GMAT test takers managed a score which is 735 and above. Now, let's look at going further down, right? For example, a 90th percentile is a good score. Let's look at something like a 720, right? 90th percentile is a good score, but we'll go to 720 and check out what 720 translated in the earlier version. 720 is a good score, is what we would have told any test taker, is likely to open doors to most business schools. You're not likely to be found wanting on GMAT count because 720 is a good score. 740 plus we say is a score which will get you scholarships in a few schools at least if you selected the schools right, right? That 720 is a 94th percentile. 6% of the GMAT test takers in the old edition managed a score which is 720 or higher. Now let's look at what the 94th percentile correspondingly here is. It's a 665. If you score a 665 in the new version of the GMAT, it is the equivalent of the 720 in the old version of the GMAT. When you keep the percentile basis in mind, you have to keep the percentile basis in mind because it's actually a relative grading finally what we are talking about. Right? So essentially, you can't say that, hey, the 725 in the old version is the same as 725 in the new version. No, 725 in the new version is 99th percentile. 720 in the old version is 94th percentile. 6% of the GMAT test takers, if you take that number, that 866,000, let's round it off to 900,000, 6%, 54,000 people managed a 720 plus in that lot. In that lot, if you looked at how many people managed a 725, just 1% of the test takers managed it, which is essentially talking about 9,000 people managed it. 1/6 of them got a score which is 725 and above, as the number of people who got 720 and above. So just adding a 5 more to your test score, saying that, hey, I had a 700 then, it is going to be the same as 705 right now, is absolute. You couldn't be more wrong than that, right? So keep this perspective in mind. Again, making a intelligent guess as to why this is possibly this kind of a difference is there, and is this difference likely to continue? Let's answer the second question first. This kind of a difference, right? 735 and above, all of which are going to be 100 percentile, is something which will not last longer because they've essentially picked up an old test format, right? What was important then is probably not important now. What was not important then becomes suddenly important now. So all of these things new test takers will factor in when they are appearing for the GMAT. Right. So essentially, if you look at a year from now, because in GMAT, this number 735, 745 that you get in the test, or 720, 760, 740, any number, that number does not change for a 5-year period. But if you look at what that 740 or the 750 corresponds to a percentile, will change during the 5-year period for which your score is valid. Let's say you took the test in 2020. In 2020, a 740 would be some percentile value. The same thing in 2023, the percentile is likely to change. Need not necessarily change, but could change. So keeping that perspective in mind, a year from now, if you look at, for example, in December 2024, these percentiles, if you look at a 735, 735 is unlikely to be the 700 percentile. Why is this going to be this way? Why is this right now this way? And why is it likely to change? First and foremost, in this gradation, in this grading system that they're using, we are suddenly bringing in something which was not into the perspective of the testing at all, into the scoring when it came to the old GMAT. Old GMAT, integrated reasoning, stayed outside of this 200 to 800. In the new format, integrated reasoning is a part of it. To start with, integrated reasoning is more difficult to score than the other two sections. Why is that? Simple. In verbal section, people who score well are people who probably are good at the language skills. People who are good at the math skills scored well in the quant. IR basically combines a little bit of data, little bit of numbers, and a little bit of inferences that come basically from the way you interpret RCCR, right? So it looks at a combination of skills. So unless someone is good, relatively good, really good in both verbal and quant, their ability to score high in the IR is basically a little stunted. So scoring high in the IR section is difficult. That basically plays a role in saying that, see, if I have to get a high score, how many people have really got high scores in all three? That number is going to be lesser. Only in verbal, I could score very high. I might be average in quant and IR. I could have scored very well in quant and average in the other two. I could have scored very well in IR and not score in the other two is not too often. Right? So that is one reason. One, IR is tough. It combines multiple skills. That's now a part of it, which makes fewer people who could have scored well in all three of that. That basically says that the 735 scoring, when you just port the old numbers into the new one, is going to have an issue. There is one more thing which we'll have to keep in mind. Because integrated reasoning was a standalone scores, and whenever we report it, we talk about our GMAT scores, right? Not when we report it. When we talk about our GMAT scores, we'll say, hey, I got a 740 in the GMAT, I got a 720 in the GMAT. We are not going to say, I got a 5.5 in the AWA and a 7 in the IR. No, we don't say that oftentimes, right? So quite often, because the 200 to 800 score did not include IR, people did not give as much importance to IR as they did to verbal and quant. So I'll say 6 or above in IR is a good score. So keep your head above water. Is many a times what we would have advised students who found they had paucity of time to do serious preparation for IR. Pretty much the same thing is what we would say to even AWA. Have a score of 5 and above in AWA and your head is above water is typically what I advise my students. If you're good at writing, get a 6 on 6. I'm happy for it. But if you're struggling with time, you have to prepare for quant, verbal, IR and AWA. If you write well enough to get a 5 on AWA, you don't have to invest another 5 more hours into AWA to make it into a 6. You might as well invest it into verbal and quant is what is the default advice that we give. This is the advice for AWA, this is the advice for IR that most test preparation companies, most mentors would have given to their students. Given that IR was basically given a second-hand treatment because it was not a part of 200 to 800, excepting a few people who focused on investment banking, who focused on the really Ivy League schools, who focused on getting into McKinsey's of the world, right? These were the students who wanted to get an 8 on 8 on IR. Many others would have said 6, 7, 8 is all good. I'll basically shoot for that, which means they said IR because it's outside. I'm not going to give too much focus to it if I'm running out of time. That would have factored into the fact that the IR scores would have been relatively lesser compared to what people would have scored in quant and verbal. That impacted basically because all of these guys whose scores are now translated into the new version did not take IR as seriously as they would have done their verbal and quant preparation and the scores that they would have got in that. That impact is now going to go off because in the new scoring version, when people start taking the focus edition, all of us are very clearly aware that quant, verbal and data insights each carries the same weightage, 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. So we cannot give a short shrift to IR. We cannot take DI lightly. We have to give it as much importance as we are given the other sections. So once that comes into play, once that awareness is there and people start taking the focus edition, you will find that the scores in IR or the data insight section as it is called right now will start catching up, and to that extent there is going to be granularity to the score. So it is not going to be, we'll revisit this in December 2024. A 735 is unlikely to be a 100 percentile at that point in time. So keep this perspective in mind. Let's go into section wise and see how this plays out, right? We'll look at the quant section, right? The scoring range initially was from 0 to 60, but practically what was important was a scoring range from 6 to 51. So essentially we're talking about a 46 point range in the older version. In the newer version, we have a 60 to 90, which is a 31 point range. So essentially the point ranges has been condensed to about 2/3 of what it was. So essentially if you find some percentile here in the old version, you should get that same percentile for 2/3 of it if everything got ported as it was in the old edition. Let's see whether that happened that way. Let's go back to the old scoring section. Right, we'll come into this. We'll look at this after we look at the old scoring one. Old scoring one, 51 was the maximum, right? That was 97th percentile. Just you lost 2 points, let's say. You lost one, came to 50. You lost one more, came to 49. 49 is losing 2 points in the old system, translated to a 73 percentile. Look at it. 27% of the GMAT test takers managed a 49 or a 50 or a 51. Notwithstanding the fact that the new scale is a condensed scale, right? Let's look at what happens there. Let's look at just the 2-point drop in the new scale. 2-point drop is an 88. 88 is a 95th percentile. Here 49 2-point drop is a 73rd percentile. 27% of the GMAT test takers managed this 49, but correspondingly only 5% of the GMAT test takers, the same test takers, when you port them to the new system, have managed to get this 88 and above, which essentially means that the percentile ranking is getting expanded in the new region, in the new scoring regime, right? Probably because data sufficiency is out and you're having lesser number of questions that are being scored. Something in the algorithm has made this behave this way. So let's go back and check out what was the 90th percentile in the old one, right? This is the old one, 87 percentile. Let's round it off to 90 percentile, right? Let's go with it. Let's see if there is an 87 percentile in the new one. But right now we'll have 87. We're thinking of rounding it off to 90. That is 50. Q51 is the maximum possible. If you scored a 50, you're in the top 13 percentile, 87. Let's round it off to 90 if required. Go back here. Is there an 87 percentile here? Somewhere 89 to 85 is there. So let's go with the 89. You have, instead of, if you dropped 1 point, you were in the 87th percentile. You drop 5 points, you are in the 89th percentile. So 90th percentile, if you look at it, you have more room. So essentially the scoring is becoming more granular. Is essentially there, A 51 was a 97th percentile. And then you come to 50, you're in the 87th percentile. They're saying these the 10% of the people are all into this one score range, which is equal to Q50. 97, top 3, 87, top 13. So this 10% of the people, test takers in the old format, where in the Q50 is what they said. Now they're saying, hey, we have a range of scores which is in that, right? This is still 97, which is Q51 equivalent, 85, 86, 87, 88, 89. That is the block in which we are finding this 10% of the people. So they're essentially bringing in a little more difference, saying that a 94th percentile and a 95th percentile, I'm able to see a difference is what they're saying. Will the difference matter? Will it not matter? They're saying that I'm able to bring about a difference between these two test takers. Whereas in the earlier version, 87 to 97, whether you are a 93rd percentile guy or a 95th percentile guy, it never got, you never knew whether you were, you knew you were above 87, but below 97 if your score is Q50. Where in the 93rd, 96th, 91st was not known, whereas a lot of those granularity are available right now in the new testing regime. Move on to verbal and see whether something similar is available there. This is the new verbal scoring range. We'll come to this. We're not going to, we'll go to the old one, check it out and come back to the new one, right? The old testing one, look at it. This is a bunched one. 99th percentile, 1% of the GMAT test takers basically had a score which is 45 to 51. This range also in the old one was from 6 to 51. Now it is between 60 to 90. So that 46 point is being essentially, let's say, compressed into a 31 point in the new version. Right. So we are saying that 45, 46, 47, 48, 49, 50, 51, right? These 6, right, 2, 4, 6, all of these essentially we are saying are in the top 1 percentile of the people, which means scoring 45 and above had been extremely difficult in the old version. The new version, what is the change that's happening? One, the number of questions has come down, which is true, 23 questions instead of 36. The entire sentence correction is out. So essentially in the new version, when they would have computed, they would have ported only RC and CR scores. Let's see how that translates right now, right? So this is where we have the verbal scores, right? Now, if you look at the 99th percentile, which is what we had, instead of having it as the top 6, it's top 4. Makes sense, right? 6 into 2 by 3 is a 4. So does not seem to have impacted significantly. Let's also go further down and check out what we have. If you go to the old one, I'll pick something like a 90th percentile. 90th percentile is 40 points. 90th percentile in quant was essentially 50 points. In verbal, it is 40 points. Now, if I do a 2/3 on this 11, right, which is like 8 points, right, let's check out whether if I subtract 8 from 90, does it work out? No. Here, there's some more difference, right? Essentially, the top 6, 7 points are essentially in the top 10%. In verbal, also there are some differences in the scoring, but it is not as dramatic as we saw in the quant section. While we are at it, I also want to point one simple thing. Look at this. We'll go back to this quant, right? In quant, right, here the 90th percentile is 85 points in the new version. In the verbal section, the 90th percentile approximately is 84 points. So 90th percentile in verbal and quant more or less are of the same point range, 84, 85, almost same. So the top 10 percentile of the GMAT test takers in the quant and the verbal section, what their point schemes are? The point schemes are almost the same, essentially meaning that it is as difficult or as easy relatively to score that top 10 percentile scores in the both the sections, both in terms of percentile as well as in terms of points. Let's compare it to the old version. Old version, again, just to recap, you skip 1 point, you're in the top 10 percentile. To be in the top 10 percentile, you can actually lose 11 points. So it essentially pointed to the fact that scoring in the top 10 percentile in the verbal section was a lot more difficult. You score just a 40, you're in the top 10 percentile. You have to score a Q50 to be in the top 10 percentile. So it appeared that you could get a higher score point in quant than in verbal in the older version. The newer version, the way they have distributed, the way the questions have been removed, the new scoring system essentially keeps this almost on par. What happens to the data insight section, the new one, where once you port IR into the main score and add data sufficiency from quant, this is how the IR section, data insight section looks, right? It is a little skewed. It is like the way the old verbal was, right? Essentially 99th percentile is the top 5 points. Fewer people manage it. Only 1% of the people have scored 85, 86, 87, 88, 89, 90, right? These 6 point scores, you have only 1% of them. As I mentioned, it's possibly because IR was never a part of the main score, so people did not give it too much importance. And data sufficiency was a tougher of the components in the problem between problem solving and data sufficiency in the quant section. Now kept the problem solving in quant, and you've taken away the tougher component into the DA section. So DA section has one where people did not paid too much emphasis, and it also had a combination of skills. So unless you're good in both verbal and quant, you could not have scored well in IR. That's one component. And the tougher quant section component DS is now in DI, which means that it is understandable that fewer people would have scored high in the data insight section. All of these are people have actually earlier taken the old format. They ported it onto the new one. Once students start taking, once they realize that DI comprises 1/3 and DI is important, IR is important, test takers will place a lot more emphasis on these sections, that the scoring pattern is definitely likely to change. If you go and check out what will be the 99th percentile a year from now, my guess is, I would make an educated guess, it's likely to be 86 or 87 rather than this 85, right? The scores are going to go up a little more to get that 99th percentile. What is 90th percentile here? 90th percentile is 81, right? So this is what you know. There's not much one can do in terms of bringing the old IR section and taking a comparison here. So let's leave that at this. So key things to keep in mind. It's not just adding a 5 point to your old score. I scored a 740 earlier. In the new system, it is 745. You couldn't be more wrong. So keep that perspective in mind. The granularity has basically gone up when it comes to the quant section. Scoring a 90th percentile in the quant and the verbal section in the new format, point wise, seems to be similar. The DA section right now has fewer people scoring a high score, and that's essentially basically because IR has been brought in, which was a tougher section, and probably students did not pay too much attention to it because it was an outside score. And also the fact that data sufficiency, which is the tougher of the two parts in quant section, is a part of DI. So these are the things that we have learned about how the new scoring system is likely to be if the old test taker scores are ported into it. But when real test takers start taking the new version, there would be adjustments to it, because test takers obviously make adjustments to how the test is going to be scored on you, and they will make preparations accordingly. So if as a test taker you're planning to do something for the focus, if you're focusing on the GMAT Focus Edition, my thing is start working very seriously on your IR, because you got one component which is completely out. Sentence correction is something that you need not worry. When it comes to quant, geometry is something that you need not worry. That's like taking away in terms of what you need to prepare. 50% of what you need to prepare in both these sections are kind of out of it, right? Is geometry, did it account for 50% of the number of questions in the old version? No. But in terms of the preparation effort, I would go to the extent of saying that 40 to 50% of the effort went into geometry. Arithmetic and algebra are relatively easier. You can crack them very well. Geometry is one, there was too many theorems, too many different things to be factored in. So preparation time-wise, it consumed a lot, though it had only 20-25% of the questions. Now that 25% of the questions is out, 50% of the preparation is out. Same for sentence correction. Reading comprehension is something that you regularly worked on. So that left us with only two things to prepare for: critical reasoning and sentence correction. Sentence correction is now out. So essentially they've taken away close to 40 or 50% of your preparation load from verbal and quant outside. Now that they've brought in IR into data insights, you cannot be lackadaisical about the way you looked at IR. Put in a lot of effort into IR. Solve as many questions as you can. Push yourself to scoring high in IR, which is what is going to take your DA score up and will also give you a relatively high score when it comes to the overall score. Hope this video has been a help as we get more insights into it, as more data becomes available. We'll add more updates about this. Best wishes for your GMAT preparation.